Imagine you're a passenger on a train chugging through Nevada in the 1870s. The train stops in a small town called Palisade, and just as you're looking out the window, all chaos breaks loose. A wild gunfight erupts on the main street, complete with a bank robbery and even an Indian raid. You've just witnessed the Wild West in all its glory, except you haven't. The entire thing was a show. The townspeople of Palisade, in cooperation with the local U.S. Army detachment and even Native American groups, staged these elaborate fights every time a passenger train pulled into town. It was a form of 19th century immersive theater, designed to give tourists the wild experience they expected. This little-known fact reveals a powerful truth. The Wild West wasn't just a period in time. It was a product, manufactured and sold to a captivated audience even as it was happening. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on that performance. We'll look past the showmanship of dime novels and Hollywood to uncover the real story. If you enjoy separating fact from fiction, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more true stories from America's past. Before we get into today's video, I have something special for you. Do you ever watch an old Western and wonder, did that really happen? Well, we've put together a free guide called the Ultimate Wild West Fact Checkers Guide, and it debunks 25 of the biggest myths lying Hollywood shows in their movies. You get it emailed to you instantly when you sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Just head on over to nativejournals.com/subscribe to grab yours and find out the truth about everything from high noon duels to what cowboys really wore. Link is in the description. Let's get into the 10 biggest myths the world was sold about the American West. Number 1. The West was a lawless land of unchecked violence. The central idea of the Wild West is its wildness. We picture a place of complete anarchy, where every dispute was settled by the gun. But this image just doesn't hold up to the facts. The historical reality was that most people in the West were desperate for law and order. Far from being lawless, most Western towns had functioning governments, laws, and sheriffs or marshals to keep the peace. Why? Because it was good for business. For a town to grow and attract families and investment, it needed to be safe. In fact, many of these hell-on-wheels towns had some of the strictest gun control laws in the country. Notorious places like Tombstone, Dodge City, and Deadwood all passed laws that prohibited carrying firearms within the city limits. When you entered town, you were legally required to check your weapons with the sheriff or at your hotel, just like checking your coat. You'd get a token to reclaim your firearm when you left. That famous gunfight at the OK Corral wasn't just a random shootout. It happened because Marshal Virgil Earp was trying to enforce Tombstone's gun ordinance against a group of cowboys who refused to disarm. The West wasn't a land of no laws. It was a land struggling, and often succeeding, to enforce them. Number 2. Disputes were settled by the high noon quick draw duel. It's the most iconic scene in any Western movie. Two men facing off on a dusty street, hands hovering over their holsters. It's a dramatic showdown of skill and nerve. It is also almost entirely a work of fiction. This ritual of the quick draw duel was invented by dime novelists in the 19th century and perfected by Hollywood. Historians have searched the records and found that an event like this almost never happened. In fact, they can only point to one single incident that even comes close. On July 21st, 1865, in Springfield, Missouri, Wild Bill Hickok faced a gambler named Davis Tutt in the town square. They were rivals over gambling debts. At about 50 yards, they both drew and fired. Tutt missed, but Hickok's shot was fatal. This event was so unusual that it became a legend, and writers turned this one-in-a-million exception into the fictional rule. Real gunfights were chaotic, messy, and dishonorable. They were usually drunken brawls that got out of hand, or they were simply ambushes, with one man shooting another in the back. The goal was to win, not to fight fair. Number 3. The cowboy was a romantic gunslinger. When we hear the word cowboy, we often think gunslinger, an adventurer, a lawman, or an outlaw defined by his skill with a six-shooter. This romantic image has almost no connection to the life of a real 19th century cowboy. The historical cowboy was not a professional fighter. He was a low-wage agricultural laborer, often just called a cowhand. His job was lonely, dirty, and dangerous, consisting of herding cattle, mending fences, and enduring brutal weather on long drives. A cowboy's most important tool wasn't his gun, it was his rope. Skill with a lariat, not marksmanship, is what made a good cowhand. Firearms were expensive, heavy, and often a nuisance when working on horseback all day. Some of the most powerful ranchers, like Charles Goodnight, actually forbade their employees from carrying pistols, seeing them as nothing but trouble. When a cowboy did carry a firearm, it was usually a rifle for hunting or protecting the herd from predators, not a handgun for fighting other men. And the idea of the outlaw cowboy robbing banks? From 1859 to 1900, historians have found evidence of only about 8 bank robberies in the entire Old West. You're more likely to see that in a single modern city in 1 year. Number 4. The cowboy look was a Stetson hat and a clean shirt. The look of the cowboy is just as iconic as his supposed deeds. We picture a man in a wide-brimmed Stetson hat, looking sharp and ready for action. This, too, is mostly a fabrication for the movies. The most famous piece of Western wear, the cowboy hat, as we know it, didn't become widely popular until the very end of the open-range era. For most of the period, a far more common hat was the bowler or derby hat. The reason was simple. Its short, stiff brim was less likely to be blown off by the wind when riding a horse. Period photos of famous figures like Billy the Kid and Butch Cassidy clearly show them wearing bowler hats, not Stetsons. Even more removed from reality is the image of the clean, handsome frontiersman. The life of a cowboy was one of constant dirt, sweat, and manure. Hygiene was a luxury they rarely had. One historian put it bluntly, saying that cowboys smelled of cow and horse dung and seldom bathed. The clean-shaven, well-dressed hero is a sanitized version of the past, created to make the characters more appealing for the silver screen. Number 5. The cowboy tradition was a uniquely American invention. One of the most powerful parts of the Western myth is the idea that the American cowboy was a brand new creation, a figure born solely from the American frontier experience. The truth is, when Anglo-American settlers expanded into the Southwest, they didn't invent a new way of life. They learned from one that had been perfected over centuries. The entire tradition of open-range cattle herding was inherited directly from the Spanish and Mexican vaquero. Spanish colonists had introduced cattle and expert horsemanship to the Americas in the 1500s. For 300 years, the vaqueros of New Spain, which later became Mexico, developed and mastered all the techniques needed to manage massive herds in a vast landscape. The American cowboy was not the first of his kind. He was a student of a long and rich tradition that came before him. Number 6. Outlaws were constantly robbing banks. The image of outlaws on horseback storming into town to rob the local bank is a cornerstone of the Western genre. We picture gangs like Jesse James's making a violent holdup and a daring escape with bags of cash. This scenario makes for a great movie plot, but it was an exceptionally rare event in the actual Old West. Historians who have studied the period have found that the classic bank robbery was almost a non-event. In the entire period from 1859 to 1900, which covers the peak of the Wild West era, researchers have only been able to confirm about 8 bank robberies across the entire region. As one historian pointed out, there are more bank robberies in a single year in a modern city like Dayton, Ohio, than there were in the whole Old West over several decades. Real outlaws understood that a bank in the middle of town was a difficult and risky target. They found it was far more practical to rob more vulnerable targets, like stagecoaches and trains, that they could attack in remote areas far from the law. Number 7. The defining conflict was Cowboys versus Indians. No story is more central to the Western movie genre than the clash between cowboys and Native Americans. It's presented as an endless battle between settlers and the original inhabitants of the frontier. This narrative, however, is one of the biggest distortions of Western history. The idea of cowboys and Native Americans as constant enemies is largely a creation of Hollywood and dime novels. As ranch hands, cowboys were focused on managing cattle, not fighting wars. Their main goal was to avoid hostile encounters, seeing such conflicts as the job of the U.S. Army. When they did interact with native groups, it was more likely to involve peaceful trade than violence. The true tragic conflicts of the era were not between cowboys and Native Americans, but between sovereign native nations and the United States government. These were wars fought over land, broken treaties, and forced relocations. The main antagonists of native peoples were the U.S. military and the massive wave of settlers the government protected. In fact, for a settler traveling west between 1840 and 1860, the danger from Native Americans was vastly exaggerated. You were hundreds of times more likely to die from drowning, disease, or a simple accident than from an attack. Number 8. Women were only helpless damsels or prostitutes. In the mythic West, women are often pushed to the sidelines. They appear either as the helpless damsel in distress who needs saving or the fallen woman working in a saloon. This narrow view erases the vast and varied roles that real women played in building the West. The reality is that the West often provided women with more opportunities and independence than they could find back east. They were integral to every part of life. They were homesteaders and ranchers, running farms under incredibly difficult conditions. They were also entrepreneurs and professionals, working as teachers, doctors, and business owners. The West was also home to incredible female trailblazers. There were sharpshooters like Annie Oakley, outlaws like Belle Starr, and figures of amazing grit like Stagecoach Mary Fields, the first African-American woman to work as a U.S. mail carrier, a job that required fending off both bandits and wolves. Politically, women in the West were pioneers. Territories like Wyoming and Utah granted women the right to vote decades before the rest of the country. Women weren't just on the sidelines, they were at the very center of building Western society. Number 9. The West was an empty land awaiting settlement. A core belief of the frontier myth is the idea that the West was an area of free land, just an empty wilderness waiting to be civilized by American pioneers. This is perhaps the most fundamental myth of them all. The American West was anything but empty. For thousands of years, it was the homeland of hundreds of distinct Native American nations with their own complex societies and trade networks. Furthermore, it had a long history of European settlement that predated the United States. The Spanish Empire had been in the Southwest for centuries, founding the city of Santa Fe in 1610, long before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. When the great wave of American migration began in the 19th century, these settlers were not entering a void. They were entering a land already populated by native nations and communities with deep Hispanic roots. They were also joined by waves of immigrants from all over the world, Irish and German immigrants who built the railroads, Scandinavian immigrants who farmed the Midwest, and Chinese laborers who performed the grueling work of connecting the country by rail. The West was never empty. It was a contested and crowded crossroads of cultures. Number 10. Saloons were simply dens of vice and violence. In the movies, the saloon is the center of all trouble. It's a place of constant drinking, brawling, and cheating at cards. While saloons could certainly be rowdy, this one-dimensional image ignores their true role in frontier society. Far from being just dens of vice, saloons were the social, economic, and even political hearts of most frontier towns. In a new settlement, the saloon was often the first business established, and it quickly became the all-purpose community center. It was the main place to get news and information. It was an informal business center where you could find work or hire hands. Saloons often served as official public spaces, hosting town meetings, elections, and even court cases if the town didn't have a courthouse. They provided meals, lodging, and even basic banking services. For the huge population of single working-class men, the miners, laborers, and cowboys, the saloon was a crucial hub for community and social life outside of work. And those iconic swinging bat-wing doors? They are largely a Hollywood invention. Real saloons had solid doors to keep out the dust and the cold. So there you have it. The real American West was a place not of lawlessness, but of a constant striving for order. Its heroes were not quick-draw gunslingers, but hard-working laborers. It was a world built not just by one type of person, but by many. and its most famous institutions were far more complex than the simple myths we've been told. The legends of the Wild West are powerful and entertaining, but the true history is even more compelling. It's a story that's messier, more complicated, and ultimately more human. What was the most surprising myth to you on this list? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into the real American past. We'll see you next time.